Good evening and welcome to tonight's City of Saco Council for Monday, June 5th, 2023. Call this meeting to order at 6:30 p.m. Recognition of all members present, the exclusion of Mayor Doyle. Deputy Mayor McPhail will be stepping in. Will you please join me in the Pledge of Allegiance? I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Thank you. Okay, item number 4 tonight. Under General, we do have a special recognition this evening. We are going to recognize C.K. Burns' dog, Rangeley. Whereas Rangeley served as a therapy dog at C.K. Burns School for 7 years, and whereas Rangeley worked alongside speech pathologist Melissa Jacques, providing animal-assisted intervention, AAI, to students with communication disorders. And whereas Rangeley's presence assisted students with emotional regulation, reduced anxiety, improved social language skills, and speech production skills by motivating students to communicate with confidence. And whereas he inspired interest and connection through his calm and loving presence. And whereas Rangeley was the first facility dog at C.K. Burns School, paving the way for an expanded program that will reach more of our community's children, starting with Getty, Melissa's new partner. Whereas Rangeley passed over the Rainbow Bridge shortly after his retirement from C.K. Burns School, leaving behind his longtime partner and friend Melissa and many children who he assisted over the years. Now, therefore, William Doyle, Mayor of Saco, does hereby proclaim June 5th, 2023 as Rangeley Jacques Day. Signed this 5th day of June, 2023 by the Mayor of the City of Saco. And I believe we have Melissa with us.
Yes.
And who is this? Who do we have?
This is Getty.
That's Getty?
This is Getty, yep.
She,
He won't get up. Getty, stand up. He's been with us since February.
thank you so much. Again. Okay, next on the agenda, committee correspondence to council. Are there any committee correspondence? Okay, not seeing any. We move on to item number 6, which is public comment. Please remember to step to the podium, state your name and address for the record, and there is a 3-minute limit. First off, we have Sheldon Nightingale.
Good evening. My name is Sheldon Nightingale. I reside in Ward 7. I'm here tonight to just speak of my against the emergency moratorium for affordable residential housing. My first thought, reading this, what constitutes an emergency in this in this case. I know that we passed a new zoning ordinance almost 2.5 years ago. Did it take us that long to figure out that we had made errors or omissions, at that time? And why is it all of a sudden an emergency? I guess I don't fully understand that. But with that, I find it quite sad when we take people who have, submitted applications, done their due diligence, put their time and effort and considerable cost in a lot of these, and now all of a sudden we're going to say, whoa, back up. You're not going to be able to do that for at least 61 days, and more than likely 122 days. These things, if we couldn't get it resolved in 2.5 years, how are we going to do it in 61 days? That's basically all I have. I know I'm probably in a minority in this situation, but I truly am opposed to this. I don't like doing things retroactively, and you're going to say, well, it's not retroactive. But it is, in essence. People have already submitted applications and gone through a lot of process. I have no problem, with a moratorium, going forward, but the people that are already in the pipeline should not be punished. Thank you.
Thank you. Next up, we have Bill Caney.
Good evening. My name is Bill Caney. I live at 3 Blackberry Lane in Saco, and I am here tonight to speak in favor of the moratorium for affordable housing. Saco currently has the tools that it needs to start addressing affordable housing for our seniors and our children. Section 188-701 of the subdivision ordinance states, subdivisions shall conform with the comprehensive plan, other policy statements of the city, the zoning ordinance, and all pertinent federal, state, and local codes and ordinances. In Saco's comprehensive plan, under Vision for Saco's Future, one of the shared priorities is adding more affordable housing and increasing a variety of housing choices. The comprehensive plan, section 3.1, states, allow for and encourage a variety of housing options to meet the budgets and needs of a full spectrum of Saco residents, including aging baby boomers, that's me, young people, low to moderate income residents, first-time home buyers, and new residents, and I could go on and on under the comprehensive plan. When some of us have questioned the lack of an affordable housing provision associated with the Lincoln Village project, which is a 332-unit project proposed for behind the Kimball Health Center, the planner indicated that the planning department has simply not had the time to suggest any affordable housing provisions for the city of Saco. I know that a lot of you think that, well, if we just build a bunch of houses, that will ultimately create housing opportunities for everyone. Respectfully, that thinking is flawed. Lincoln Village is proposing 332 units, which will be sold at market prices. They include mostly 2-bedroom condominiums, which will be on the market for around $400,000. And the duplexes and single families are going to cost a lot more than that. Some would say that with the addition of 332 units, people who are renting in Saco now and Saco property owners who want to downsize will pay these market prices and be able to free up some other houses and apartments for other folks. I have news for you. Most renters in Saco cannot afford the prices in Lincoln Village, certainly not at the interest rates that we have today. People who want to sell and downsize, they're going to get top dollar for their houses. Why not? They should. And we're not creating opportunities for our residents of Saco. We're creating opportunities for out-of-state people to come in and pay cash for these units. So the problem of a place like Lincoln Village is just perpetuating the lack of affordable housing here in Saco. So please don't ignore your comprehensive plan. Do not pay lip service to affordable housing. Biddeford and Old Orchard Beach have provided for affordable housing. We have done very little in that area. Now, some of you may discount what I'm saying because I have publicly opposed Lincoln Village. I have consistently publicly opposed Lincoln Village. I only ask that for you who have publicly indicated your support for affordable housing, please be consistent yourselves and support this moratorium. And one last quick thing, I'm sorry I'm over, but people are concerned about what's in the pipeline. I get it. Lincoln Village is an example, 332 units. There certainly is enough room there to have some affordable housing. The developers said the build out on that project is 11 years. So missing 61 days or 122 days is not going to hurt them. They're still going to make a lot of money. Thank you.
Thank you. Next up, we have Lynn Copeland.
Good evening, Deputy Mayor and council people, well, councilmen, I guess. My name is Lynn Copeland. I live at 526 Ferry Road in Saco. I am also state representative for a good part of Saco as well. So we've heard this proposal before, and not a lot of it has changed from the original time that it was brought up, but I would advocate that we can walk and chew gum. So what's happening is we have people who have paid their building permits, spent the money, had their engineers or whomever do their background work, test the soils, whatever people do, right? So they've put money in the bank on this. They have their budgets, they have their lines of credits or whatever they have. They've invested in Saco. And we have heard in the last few years about people not wanting to come to Saco to build because it's a ridiculous process, it's not consistent, and we're adding to that now. So if we want growth, and that's a question that everybody will have to answer for themselves, but if we want growth, we need to have people wanting to come to Saco rather than bustling Biddeford or Scarborough with their big projects. There's nothing happening here, and I think that we need to open our minds and consider that this is all about the Kimball property, although there are those who will say it's not. We all know it is. And the lawsuits. A few years ago, we went through a bunch of lawsuits, developers suing, all this, and that's spending my taxpayer money. I'm a taxpayer too. And I see that as absolutely happening here. I got a minute left. So I do have a question. Why haven't we heard from the Comprehensive Plan Committee whether they considered the new zoning or not? So we're all going on this that we have to go back and reinvent the wheel. But maybe that determination has been made. We have no information. We just have opinions. I'm just so disappointed. I kind of feel like this is unethical to change when people are putting themselves forward and putting in money and, suspending their money on property that they've purchased that they're still paying for us to say, okay, well, 61 days, then we could do another 61 days. I don't see how that will not be sued. That is just absolutely egregious, in my opinion. Thank you for listening.
Thank you. Okay, next up we have Glenn Charette.
Good evening. I'm Glenn Charette. I live at 240 Ferry Road. I'm here not representing the planning board. I'm here representing Glenn Charette, and I'm not going to voice any opinion from the planning board. I'm against the moratorium. I think it's an unfair hardship to place on the 11 applications that the planning board is now reviewing. And all those applications are in different phases of acceptance. And all those applicants have paid thousands and thousands of dollars to get to where they are. And I think it's unfair to impose a hardship on them when they've tried to accomplish all the requirements of the planner, the planning board, and the city of Saco. As far as the term complete, which was used in the moratorium, they can be complete in the sketch plan and they can be complete in the preliminary plan. So that's not clearly defined. And I'm pretty sure the town planner has affordable housing already on the book. She's already written some revisions to the ordinance. I'm all for affordable housing. I just don't think we should punish developers. You know, if a moratorium has to be set forward, then let's set it ongoing as of today and not make it for the 11 applications that are still pending in the planning board. And of course, the workload, if we stop all the applications or most of the applications, again, I agree, this is all about the Lincoln Street project. If we postpone the applications, then that's a backlog for the planning board and the planner. If we don't accept applications for the next 6 months or 8 months or 60 days, whatever it is, that's also a backlog for the town planner. And she has a busy department already. Thanks for your time.
Thank you. Next up, we have Rob Biggs.
My name is Rob Biggs, 334 Lincoln Street in Saco. And when making public comment before the planning board, my counselor, Phil Hatch, says that he is a city councilor but is not representing city council and not commenting as a city councilor. With that in mind, I am a member of the Saco Planning Board. But today I'm not representing the planning board or commenting as a planning board member. I am, however, a resident of Saco. I would like to bring forth some questions and thoughts for you to think about as you discuss the emergency moratorium affordable residential housing. On January 11th, 2021, City Council adopted a new zoning ordinance. Additionally, on March 28th, 2022, City Council adopted a new comprehensive plan, which the state of Maine subsequently accepted on February 29th, 2023. So my first question is, what event has created an emergency? In both the zoning as well as the comprehensive plan, there is language and our goals addressing affordable housing. This leads to my next question. What has been done or is being worked on regarding affordable housing since January 11th, 2021 and March 28th, 2022? What action has been taken since then, as well as since the previous proposal for an emergency moratorium here last year? My next question is, what specific actions will be proposed and what specific outcomes can we possibly expect in the next 61 days that haven't been addressed since the adoption of the zoning ordinance on January 11th, 2021? Is there an affordable housing task force, commission, or committee that meets regularly? And if so, is this group made up of city staff, elected and appointed officials, developers, realtors, and local citizens? Again, what hasn't been done since January 2022 that will be completed in the next 61 days? Affordable housing cannot be addressed solely through legislation, ordinances, or moratoriums. You need governmental financial support, plain and simple. With residential construction costs exceeding $225 per square foot, plus infrastructure costs such as stormwater, sewer, and roads, new homes are exceeding $400,000. We need state and federal financial support to create progressive public and private partnerships. To do this, let's not recreate the wheel. There are neighboring communities doing some remarkable things. One that I'm aware of is Brunswick, where they're using state money to create not just affordable housing, but additionally they're creating housing specifically for asylum seekers. I would suggest that you invite Brunswick Director of Economic Development, Sally Costello, down and pick her brain to help develop some good strategies. Let's act and think outside of the box. In closing, there would be some very concerning unintended consequences of the moratorium. There are many projects that are in the review process going through the planning board for appropriate needed housing stock in small pockets throughout Saco and North Route 1 where businesses are starting to build due to the influx of residences. As this would all stop, Saco would be telling these developers to go elsewhere. Go ahead and work hard on affordable housing, which I am totally in favor of. But trust the system that you currently have in place with the planning staff, planning board, and you, City Council. We can walk and chew gum at the same time. Thank you.
Thank you. And next on the list, we have Don Pylon. Okay. Okay, that is all we have signed up on the list. If there is anyone else wishing to speak, please step up.
Good evening. Jean Saunders, 3 Plymouth Drive. So I'm here today to voice my opposition to the emergency moratorium for affordable housing. As we're all very well aware, there's a shortage of housing in our area, and it seems premature at this time to stop this. I am a huge proponent of affordable housing. I work very hard to understand and work with people that work with affordable housing in my volunteer role. But this stopping development is not the answer. We'll be putting the city in jeopardy to change the rules midstream, not to mention the ill will generated by pulling the rug out from developers who have in good faith followed the processes put in place by the city of Saco, only to find out that we have changed our minds and we must now halt all progress for 61 days, and I'm suggesting probably much longer. Other municipalities have put in place building moratoriums. Biddeford, for example, in a recent article, they actually Jim Bennett spoke about that their moratorium will have no impact on any development currently going through the city approval process. We should also note that in this article, the moratorium will allow the city to develop new ordinances, rules, and regulations as recommended by the Mayor's Affordable Housing Committee report. Where is Saco's Affordable Housing Committee report? City Administrator Cainrath reported not long ago that they were forming a new affordable housing committee. Why the emergency moratorium before the committee's report? Why would we undermine the work of the committee, not to mention the work that the planning board has already done in their due diligence by stopping developmental projects currently in process? Why is there an emergency right now? There's value to consider amendments to our current zoning ordinance, especially as it relates to inclusionary zoning. But to stop all current ongoing development projects seems questionable and again undercuts the processes our city has put in place. When residents volunteer their time to serve in positions such as the planning board, they should be supported and not undermined by their city council. This is not an emergency. Perhaps the city, after receiving the report from the Housing Committee, can develop their procedures. As I said, I'm very concerned about housing options. I ask you to vote no to this emergency moratorium. As an illustration of the current ongoing housing crisis in Saco, not long ago I received a call from a city staff member at City Hall asking whether Saco had yet to develop a home share program. Because there was such a lack of housing, the city was having difficulty hiring first responders. We need more housing. We need not to stop the process. As people have already said, we can walk and chew gum. Please vote no. Thank you.
Thank you, Jean. Anyone else wishing to speak from the public?
Good evening. I'm Justin Hill. I live at 108 Bradley Street. I'm a member of the Conservation Commission, but I'm speaking as a private citizen. So before I go any further, there's a lot of people who, while I disagree with voting no, I'm actually in favor of the moratorium. I do agree with the statement that there should be actions taken in place. There should be a task force focused on this. How do we approach affordable housing? I'm just curious, I'm sure there are some people, but who has bought a house in the last few years? We've done that. We've been fortunate. We sold our home in Michigan and moved over here. But I talk to people at work all the time, people who have come to Saco to look for things, and there's no chance. Young engineers I work with over in Pratt and Whitney, and they don't feel like York, Saco, a lot of towns have basically priced them out of the competition when they're going against more senior people. I would say another question to ask is, what is affordable? Because if you start looking at Zillow and you're really looking in a house search, I bet that definition changes quickly for a lot of people. I do want to highlight, according to the Southern Maine Planning and Development Commission and the Maine Housing Authority, which was updated in July 2021, municipalities in Southern Maine say affordability is their greatest challenge. Home between 2015 and 2019, York County median home prices, I apologize, let me back up. Median incomes increased by 13.54%, while home prices increased by 34.88%. The data shows that this county as a whole is unaffordable for almost all working-class families. The Maine housing data suggests that Southern Maine is more extreme and is rapidly outpacing the rest of the state in this regard. We were fortunate. We got here into Saco. We had some opportunities. We looked all over this area, Kennebunk Port, a couple other areas, and we were lucky to find a home on Bradley that we very much enjoy. The reason I'm in favor of the moratorium, and hopefully we would use that time to focus on a task force to make active change, is I think right now the focus on just development at any cost to say we're getting it in, there's a lot of development going on. I agree. Why stop development? The problem is it responsible? Is it affordable? So I would say take that time, examine the issues, determine the factors, and also we have things in place with the comprehensive plan and some other things. I think we should be more forward focused on that, more proactive, as opposed to simply saying, well, those aren't necessarily enforceable or ordinances yet. We have an opportunity to be forward thinking. That's all I have. Thank you.
Thank you. Good evening.
Good evening. Chelsea Hill, 108 Bradley Street. I'm here tonight to ask you to vote in favor of the emergency moratorium for affordability. Case law is well established, including up to the U.S. Supreme Court, that local municipalities retain the right to enact emergency moratorium. And as long as it's, there's a three-prong test. It's for the purpose of researching and implementing changes to zoning ordinances or comprehensive plans. It's of limited duration, and that the government acts promptly to research and implement such changes. We have a responsibility to people in our community, our most vulnerable community members, to protect them and offer access to safe housing and affordable housing. And our comprehensive plan is written as such. But we know that it's essentially void because we don't have a way to ask developers or landlords to share their housing pricing information as a part of the review process. And that takes the teeth out of your comprehensive plan. A large section of your comprehensive plan, Policy 3.3, is very specific. It's almost the most specific section of the comprehensive plan. It says in Section A that 10% of all housing units that are approved will be at 80% of the AMI for the region. Section E says that 30 to 60% of the housing units will be, that a portion of the housing units will be priced at 30 to 60% of AMI. And Section F is for extremely impoverished families that you'll offer or you'll ensure housing at 30% of AMI, which is incredibly low. 80% of AMI, I'm not an expert on affordable housing by any stretch of the imagination, but it appears as though we would expect 80% of AMI in Saco for a family of 3 to be $66,000 a year. And that's just simply not, there's no housing, you can't buy housing for that amount of money, you just can't qualify. And so I would urge you to do what we call in the military, take a knee and drink water, and recoup and understand what we need to do in order to move forward so that people can actually live here and save for retirement and take vacations with their families and buy new cars. I have lived in communities with incredible poverty next to incredible wealth. It was not in the United States, but it was in another country, and it doesn't work for anyone. It makes people build walls. My house had tall, tall walls around it with bars on the windows, and there were shanty towns where people lived because they could not do anything else. So I ask you to intervene here and protect people in our community so that they can simply afford to live. Thank you.
Thank you. Anyone else wishing to speak?
I'm sorry. Hello, everyone. I'm Kelly Archer, 185 Bradley Street. I had a prepared comment, and I ended up changing it a little bit because Inga Brown, who was going to be here to speak at the podium, she did send you a letter. But since we all are talking about it, I am going to add some of her excerpts from her email plus my own thoughts. I too looked at 3 years ago a 20-year study from SMPDC and the Maine Housing Authority, and using pre-pandemic values. I believe we would all agree that affordable housing is exponentially worse now in 2023. Home prices continue to rise, while at the same time incomes fall short and do not keep pace with rising prices. Communities around us are addressing affordable housing. We must do the same. I'm going to add at this point, as an original member of the ZORS committee and working with the planning board, working with the LRPC, working with everyone in the city of Saco, we have spent 6 figures of studies, of reports. That's my taxpayer money, and we have not addressed these subsequent amendments, these affordable housing, and everything that I have been coming forward to the planning board and to the council for 3.5 years now. So we need to find that time, and there's no perfect time. There isn't. Somebody's going to not be pleased, but we need to address what the Maine law requires: any comprehensive plan developed by a municipality to aim for at least 10% of new residential development to meet the definition of affordable housing. We haven't even addressed that ordinance that also states that we must comply with the State of Maine's Growth Management Act. This has been ongoing discussion for 3.5 years. It is critical now that Saco addresses this affordability with this moratorium to comprehensively examine what the important actions are that we can take prior to a point of no return. Please vote yes and allow the staff, boards, and commissions the necessary time now, 3.5 years ongoing later, the necessary time to address affordability, comply with all local, state, and federal laws, and bring our comp plan and ordinance into alignment. And with Inga, she goes, housing is a human right, not a luxury, and our city must ensure the safety and security of its residents by being a leader in residential housing policies. Until the discrepancies in the Saco's new zoning ordinance are resolved and the ordinance is made consistent with our newly adopted comp plan, affordable housing goals will languish in a no man's land of incomplete and conflicting policy and ordinance language, leaving the city of Saco unable to effect meaningful change and improvement for our residents. A 61-day emergency moratorium on processing land use applications for residential housing is a logical and even-handed approach. The moratorium would allow planning staff and board the time needed to carefully modify and revise our zoning ordinance with affordable housing goals front and center as they work to fully harmonize our comp plan goals with our local ordinance. Good, meaningful work takes time. This protected time out is crucial to enact policy and zoning ordinance revisions that are powerfully clear and concise in order to effect the changes our community seeks in incentivizing affordable housing. Then, city councilors, I urge you to vote in favor of this moratorium as a clear sign of your commitment to improving the policies and ordinances that will make residential affordable housing in Saco a defining characteristic of our city. And finally, I will say that we as a city has been stagnant with what we need to get done in 3.5 years. We went through a council liaison,
Allowed a minute over.
and I thank you very much. And please, thank you for your thoughtful consideration on this very important matter.
Thank you. Anyone else wishing to speak? Okay, not seeing anyone seeking recognition. Move on to item 7, the approval of the minutes. Is there a motion to approve the minutes of May 22nd, 2023?
So moved.
Motion by Counselor Berman. Is there a second?
Second?
Second by Counselor Hatch. Roll call vote. Counselor Archer?
Aye.
Counselor Purdy?
Yes.
Counselor Gunn?
Yes.
Counselor Berman?
Yes.
Counselor Hatch?
Yes.
Counselor Johnston?
Yes.
Motion to approve the minutes passes 6-0. Next up, item 5, we have consent agenda. There are 5 items on the consent agenda, and that is to confirm the mayor's reappointment to the Historic Preservation Commission of Chris Delano, Thomas Hardy, Alex McPhail, and Stephen Ryan. And also to confirm the mayor's appointment to the Southern Maine Dredge Authority Board of Directors, Rick Millard. Are there any items anybody wishes to remove to discuss? Okay, not seeing. Is there a motion to approve the consent item?
So moved.
Motion by Counselor Hatch. Is there a second?
Second.
Counselor Archer, second. Roll call vote. Counselor Archer.
Aye.
Counselor Purdy.
Yes.
Counselor Gunn.
Yes.
Counselor Berman.
Yes.
Counselor Hatch.
Yes.
And Counselor Johnston.
Yes.
Motion to approve the consent items agenda, 6-0. Takes us now to item number 9, action items. The first action tonight is a public hearing for the renewal for a special entertainment permit for Go See Tice. And that is Counselor Gunn.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Mayor. Mabel Reed Wallace, doing business as Go See Tice BBQ LLC, has applied for a renewal of the establishment's special entertainment permit. The applicant has paid all applicable permit fees, and the clerk has properly advertised the public hearing in accordance with Saco City Code, Chapter 93, Entertainment, subsection 93-2. I move to open the public hearing.
Motion's been made. Is there a second?
Second.
Second by Counselor Berman. Any discussion? Okay, roll call vote. Counselor Archer?
Aye.
Counselor Purdy?
Yes.
Counselor Gunn?
Yes.
Counselor Berman?
Yes.
Counselor Hatch?
Yes.
Counselor Johnston?
Yes.
Motion passes to open the public hearing 6-0. At this time, if there are any members of the public that wish to speak, please step forward, state your name and address. Okay, we are not seeing any members of the public seeking recognition. Counselor Gunn?
Thank you. I move to close the public hearing and be it ordered that the City Council grant the renewal application submitted by Mabel Reed Wallace, doing business as Go See Tice BBQ LLC, for a special entertainment permit. I move to approve the order.
Motion's been made to approve the order. Is there a second?
Second.
Second by Counselor Berman. Any discussion? Okay, roll call vote. Counselor Archer?
Aye.
Counselor Purdy?
Yes.
Counselor Gunn?
Yes.
Counselor Berman?
Yes.
Counselor Hatch?
Yes.
Counselor Johnston?
Yes.
Motion passes 6-0. Action item B is another public hearing for a new application for a special entertainment permit for Pacifico Restaurant, and that is Counselor Johnston.
Thank you. Alejandra Herrera, doing business as Pacifico Restaurant LLC, has applied for a new special entertainment permit. The applicant has paid all applicable permit fees, and the clerk has properly advertised the public hearing in accordance with Saco City Code, Chapter 93, Entertainment 93-2. I move to open the public hearing.
Motion's been made to open the public hearing. Is there a second?
Second.
Second by Counselor Berman. Any discussion? Okay, roll call vote. Counselor Archer?
Aye.
Counselor Purdy?
Yes.
Counselor Gunn?
Yes.
Counselor Berman?
Yes.
Counselor Hatch?
Yes.
Counselor Johnston?
Yes.
Motion to open the public hearing passes 6-0. If there is any member of the public wishing to speak, please step up, state your name and address.
Rob Biggs, 334 Lincoln, Unit Number 1, Saco. I can't imagine any one of you possibly turning this down, but I do want to say how proud I am of Alejandra and Carlos I met them when I was the Saco Main Street Executive Director, and they were just starting their business. I've worked a lot with them, as English is not their first language, but you know, they went from a small little restaurant in Pepperell Square to then one in Portland. They opened Pacifico during the middle of the pandemic as Alejandra was giving birth to their first child. And then on top of that, they've now expanding into what used to be the bagel property, and they're going to put in an incredibly good feature for their restaurant, being a salsa bar, which will have dancing a couple of nights a week and live music. So go ahead and please vote positively for this. And again, I can't say how proud I am of them and their success with Saco.
Thank you. Any other members wishing to speak? Okay, not seeking any members of the public to be recognized.
I move to close the public hearing. Be it ordered that the City Council grant the new application submitted by Alejandra Herrera doing business as Pacifico Restaurant LLC for a special entertainment permit. I move to approve the order.
Is there a second?
Second.
Second by Counselor Berman. Any discussion? Roll call vote. Counselor Archer?
Aye.
Counselor Purdy?
Yes.
Counselor Gunn?
Yes.
Counselor Berman?
Yes.
Counselor Hatch?
Yes.
Counselor Johnston?
Yes.
Motion passes 6-0. Okay, next up, we have item C, which is a first reading for fiscal year 24 budget amendment number 1, Deputy Fire Chief. And that is Counselor Purdy.
Thank you, Deputy Mayor. The fire department has demonstrated the need for a third deputy chief due to several operational challenges. This amendment to the fiscal year 24 budget funds that headcount by reassigning the 2 additional firefighters approved by council on May 8th. Be it ordered that the City Council approves first reading of budget amendment number 1, fiscal year 2024, and moves to schedule the second and final reading for June 26, 2023.
Motion has been made. Is there a second?
Second.
Second by Counselor Gunn. Any discussion? Okay, not seeing any discussion. Roll call vote. Counselor Archer?
Aye.
Counselor Purdy?
Yes.
Counselor Gunn?
Yes.
Counselor Berman?
Yes.
Counselor Hatch?
Yes.
Counselor Johnston?
Yes.
Motion passes 6-0. Okay, next up, item D is 1 reading, an emergency moratorium on commercial solar energy systems, the extension. And that is Counselor Gunn.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Mayor. On April 24th, 2023, the City Council adopted an emergency ordinance to provide time for updates to the city's code of ordinances to better regulate life safety and environmental matters related to commercial solar energy systems. To date, planning staff has been coordinating draft revisions with city staff and the city attorney and plans to present these updates at the next available council meeting. The purpose of this request is to extend the emergency ordinance to ensure enough time to conclude the drafts and bring them to council for the ordinance revision process. Be it found by the Saco City Council that an emergency exists, and therefore be it ordered that the city extend the emergency moratorium ordinance on commercial solar energy systems, and that during the time of the moratorium it is in effect, no board, officer, body, agency, agent, or employee of the city of Saco shall accept, process, or act upon any application or for any approval related to the establishment of a commercial solar energy system.
Motion has been made by Counselor Gunn. Is there a second?
Second.
Second by Counselor Purdy. Any discussion? Counselor Berman.
Yeah, thank you, Madam Deputy Mayor. I'm going to have a lot more to say about emergency moratoriums in a few minutes, I suspect. But I do just want to speak a little bit now on the idea of emergency moratoriums in general. In my mind, they need to be used with the utmost discretion. The first one I remember was an emergency moratorium regarding cannabis and medical cannabis on Main Street. We had failed to update our ordinances to account for some changes in state definitions, perhaps allowing medical cannabis in places that we didn't intend to. We enacted an emergency moratorium to block that. And at the time, I spoke that I was afraid that enacting that emergency moratorium would create a new tool in our toolbox, and we would see a blossoming of emergency moratoriums as a matter of routine. And I'm afraid that here, with 2 emergency moratoriums on our agenda in one night, that vision I had has come to pass. There's a reason why we normally do things as part of normal business, right? As part of a 3-meeting process, which can also, of course, pass moratoriums. Right? When we have a first reading, it allows the public to know what we're thinking, where we're going, what council is intending to do. They then have time in order to provide feedback to us about the effects and consequences of the ordinance we're thinking about passing. We can then take that feedback during the public hearing into account before we pass our final bill. When we enact emergency legislation, it precludes the public from having that input into our process. Right? They have at most 3 days in order to provide input. We cannot respond to it. There isn't that back and forth and transparency that we expect. In addition, the very nature of an emergency suggests that there's an emergent situation occurring, something that's new and worsening, and that actual and real harm would occur if we didn't immediately stop it using the emergency moratorium. In this case, in commercial solar energy, I believed it may have to do with life safety, that if we allowed large-scale commercial solar energy installations to occur without the proper life safety ordinances in place, we could be causing danger to Saco citizens, our inspectors, our grid, or others. But truly, I believe they need to be enacted as rarely as possible and for the shortest possible duration. So I say all that both to talk about this emergency moratorium as well as the other one on the agenda, and to say that I'm really dismayed that we continue to use this tool, that we renew them fairly routinely. I think this is really the opposite of what we want to be doing. I will support this because I believe there's an ordinance ready to go at our next meeting, and we will start our regular process by which the public can provide feedback. But I'd really encourage the council and staff to think about emergency moratoriums as really a last-ditch tool to be used in the case of extreme emergencies and not part of our regular business. Thank you.
Thank you. Any other discussion? Okay, not seeing any hands raised. Roll call vote. Councilor Archer?
Aye.
Councilor Purdy?
Yes.
Councilor Gunn?
Yes.
Councilor Berman?
Yes.
Councilor Hatch?
Yes.
Councilor Johnston?
Yes.
Motion passes 6-0. Okay, next up, item E is 1 reading, emergency moratorium, affordable residential housing. And that is Councilor Hatch.
Thank you, Deputy Mayor McPhail. With many hundreds of new residential real estate units either previously approved or currently in the Planning Department Planning Board review pipeline, there's an extremely minute percentage of those units committed to be available to Saco residents within the current residential housing affordability metrics established by the Maine Housing Authority. Additionally, the City Council adopted a new zoning ordinance on January 11th, 2021. Post-adoption, it has become clear that the review process leading up to the proposed language in the new zoning ordinance left several unresolved zoning issues and several unresolved discrepancies that need to be addressed via subsequent amendments, including but not limited to promoting the development of affordable residential housing options for the citizens of Saco. Additionally, the City Council adopted a new comprehensive plan on March 28th, 2022, which the state of Maine subsequently accepted, and I believe it was on March 1st, 2023, not February 29th. I don't think it was a leap year. State of Maine Title 30-A, Chapter 187, Planning and Land Use Regulations, Section 4352, Paragraph 2 indicates that a zoning ordinance must be pursuant to and consistent with a comprehensive plan adopted by the municipal legislative body. To date, the city has not taken action to confirm substantive consistency between the two documents, including but not limited to affordable residential housing initiatives. An emergency moratorium is being proposed to provide ample time to establish a disciplined, long-term smart growth strategy, specifically addressing affordable residential housing, and ample time for sections of the zoning ordinance to be reviewed for consistency with the aforementioned comprehensive plan related to affordable housing. Now, I've come to realize, and I'm reading from a communication that I shared with my fellow councilors in their entirety yesterday for the public record. I've come to realize that the original draft of my item commentary and emergency ordinance is not clear as I would like it to be. So to avoid potential confusion during the council discussion, I will read a slightly modified version of the suggested motion this evening. And this is the motion. Be it ordered that the City Council, pursuant to State of Maine Title 30-A, Part 2, Municipalities, Subpart 6A, Chapter 187, Planning and Land Use Regulation, Section 4356, approve a moratorium on the acceptance of new land use applications and on the processing of any pending applications that have not received preliminary approval as described in the supporting emergency moratorium document. I move to approve the order. And additionally, to be consistent with the proposed motion, the draft emergency moratorium document, paragraph 2, scope of moratorium will need to be modified to read, quote, except for those land use applications received and processed by the Planning Department, which have received preliminary approval from the Planning Board before the enactment of this moratorium, no land use applications for residential housing will be processed by the Planning Department during the moratorium period, including any extensions thereto.
Thank you. City Manager Ken Rath, you have that documented down? Okay, thank you. Is there a second?
Second.
Councilor Johnston? Second by Councilor Johnston. Any discussion? Councilor Berman?
Sure, I can go first. I imagine others will say things too. As I previewed, I have some concerns. I really think there are two separate issues here. One is the emergency, and second is the moratorium. Of course, those don't need to be linked. One could enact a moratorium as part of normal business, but that's not what's being proposed here. So I have deep concerns about using emergency ordinances, as I just previewed. Right, the 3-meeting process is critical, and I think it needs to be saved for situations that simply cannot go through a 3-meeting process because great harm will come. The situation needs to be emergent in order to require an emergency moratorium. As far as I can tell, nothing has happened in the last few weeks that would constitute an emergency. Right, that we failed to enact a moratorium following the 2001 passing of the zoning ordinance or the 2002 or 2022 passing of a comprehensive plan doesn't make it an emergency today. In fact, I don't understand anything from the rationale that appears to be an emerging situation. Right? The dates are years old. The situation is ongoing. I very desperately don't want to abuse emergency ordinances. Right? And if we contrast that with the one that we just renewed, right, we'll see that our planning department already had an ordinance in the works when they proposed the emergency moratorium, and there was a possibility of real lasting harm had we not put it into place. Second, I have deep concerns about the goals of this moratorium. I agree that we want affordable housing, desperately. It's one of my top priorities. I also agree that we want smart growth. I also agree that we need to shore up our infrastructure to accommodate that growth. I agree with all of those things. What I disagree with is that we could make those things happen in 61 days. We haven't made progress on them in the months and months that we've been talking about it. I don't think we will in the next 61 days. Moreover, I don't see how this moratorium facilitates that process at all. In fact, I think it's likely we end up in 61 days looking at the potential for renewal with very little progress being made. In order to make progress, staff would have to know council's will, what ordinances we'd want. I don't know council's will. We have a workshop next week to have that discussion, to clarify where council wants to go on these issues. I'm excited to have that conversation, but I'm confused why we're proposing a timeout to work on these ordinances before we've had that discussion, before we've set a direction. If, in the context of having that discussion, in the process of understanding where we want to go, it turns out that we need a moratorium in order to get there, I would suggest that we do so as the course of normal business and not as an emergency. Without such a plan in place, without clear guidance from council to staff about what revisions we want, about what changes we want, in 61 days, we'll end up right where we are, thinking about renewing it. Renewing an emergency moratorium will cause chaos. Folks won't know when they can build, what the rules will be, or when it will end. We simply can't allow that situation to emerge. I also have deep concerns about the retroactivity. I know the word retroactivity isn't in the ordinance. Right? It's been crafted not to, but it will target applications not yet found complete. As we heard from many audience members, these are people who followed the rules, who paid their applications fee, who've submitted applications in good faith under the rules that exist. To change the rules midstream on people who are participating in good faith in our process is, in fact, retroactive. I'm also concerned about the side effects. We've approved a grant proposal to create affordable housing. We hope that comes back before the planning board approved. Is that the kind of project we're targeting here? Would that be affected? Right? I'm concerned about that. I'm really happy to discuss affordable housing, discuss growth strategies, limits, long-term goals, and work on ordinances to meet those goals. I'm excited to start that at our next workshop. I don't see how this helps. Thank you.
Thank you. Anyone else? Councilor Gunn.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Mayor. By your permission, can I ask the city solicitor, Tim Murphy, to come up to the podium?
Absolutely. Good evening,
Council.
Good evening, City Solicitor Murphy.
How can I help?
Yes, to piggyback on some comments that Councilor Berman just made and some concerns that I have, separate from the issue of a moratorium in and of itself, though, because as a member of the audience did say, yes, we have a right to pass moratoriums, and we have home rule. It's part of our charter. No one is disputing that. However, the issue of what could be construed as retroactivity, and I'm going to point you to the language. Now, I'm reading from Councilor Hatch's follow-up email that specifically alluded to the corrections that he just made, though, so I don't lose my place, though. Planning and Land Use Regulations, subsection 4356, approve a moratorium on the acceptance of new land applications and on the processing of any pending applications that have not received preliminary approval as described in the supporting, quote, emergency moratorium document. Now, of course, anybody who's been paying attention to the news last couple weeks knows that there's been some sunset to that giant debate that we had as a state of whether to build a power line through western Maine, with the state, if I recall correctly, the state Supreme Court saying essentially it was an attempt at retroactivity, and the fact that a referendum was against it and it has no legal standing, and that the process can go forward. So in that context, even though the word retroactive is not placed in here, as another person mentioned, we have 11 pending matters before the planning board, which I'm the liaison of, in various stages of development. If any of those have not received the preliminary approval, would that, in your legal opinion, constitute or reasonably constitute some form of retroactivity?
Probably.
Yeah.
So let me clarify something. The draft moratorium came to me last week, did not include the language of the motion that was made tonight. So the motion made tonight varies and talks about, the original moratorium used the word completeness. And it was going to affect any project that had not received a vote of completeness. And I indicated to the city administrator that there might be some problems with that language. This new language you heard tonight is new to me. So what I'd really like is an opportunity to go back tomorrow and take Councilor Hatch's language and compare it against the retroactivity question you're raising. Because it is some question what projects it would apply to. But arguably, I think the intent is to have it apply to anybody that has not received a planning board vote yet.
That would be my interpretation, yes, is that, to use the Lincoln Street proposal as an example, because to a lot of folks, that is the main issue. They've gone through the process many, many times with a public hearing. The public hearing was closed, then reopened at the public's behest tomorrow night, with no time frame of whether or not they're going to actually vote on it. So the fact that they haven't even received preliminary approval, this could be construed as an attempt to basically preclude them from having a vote or even a further debate on it for another 60 days. That's my interpretation of it.
I suspect that's the intention, but it's unclear.
Yeah.
And now it's been modified tonight from what I originally read. If I could raise an additional point, Councilor Berman, interesting, used this word delink the action from an emergency. I think I was in the back, but I think you used that word. I actually think in some ways they are totally linked because the charter allows for moratoriums, but it expressly states that you cannot have a moratorium without a public emergency, which I think is the point Councilor Berman is getting at, is that are the requisite emergency conditions in place at this moment in time? Do we have something that's going to affect life, safety to the public? That's not for me, that's a policy judgment for all of you, but I would suggest to you that in some ways they are actually inextricably linked, with all due respect, Councilor. I think I knew what you meant. So the state law moratorium might be a little different, but you're acting under a charter provision which requires that you find and you vote that a public emergency exists tonight. So that's a burden you have.
Thank you. Does that answer your questions?
I believe it does. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Any other discussions or questions for Solicitor Mercy? Councilor Purdy.
Thank you. Excuse me. To piggyback on Councilor Berman and Councilor Gunn, I agree with everything that was said. I'd also like to say that, we definitely do need to address affordable housing. In fact, it's on the agenda for next Monday. We're going to have a workshop. I think this moratorium is kind of putting the cart before the horse in that respect. A couple of other concerns. One is that this doesn't really differentiate between developments and single-family housing. One could say that somebody that just bought a 2-acre parcel in North Saco couldn't go through the process either. My other concern is the litigation that it opens the city up to. I seem to remember a couple of years ago there was a lot of public comment complaining about the amount of tax dollars being spent on attorney's fees. So, at any rate, that's another concern for me. And then I just think that it sends the wrong message to the developers, the people who are investing in building in our city. So I will be voting against the moratorium. Thank you.
Thank you. Councilor Archer.
Yes, thank you, Deputy Mayor. So I've been thinking on this one and how to approach this. For the last couple of years, Saco leadership has dropped the ball on housing affordability. We have a housing committee of 2 counselors, and there's been no appointments to actually ever getting that going forward. We've had this committee for years, and it's just sat. And we've seen the increased prices, we've seen housing and affordability come to fruition, or where it is today, it's unaffordable. I want to bring up just some facts. I don't want to go through emotion, but I want to go through facts on this. Is September 26th of 2022, Councilor Hatch tried to bring this as a temporary residential development moratorium, and it went nowhere. So for years, we've done nothing. Most recently, we've done nothing to really address. Most recently, we started. That was with the city administrating a task force. But for years, we've done nothing, and we've gotten to this point. I want to bring in some more facts. United States Census data for Saco. Average median income is $72,700. Housing, HUD, Department of Housing and Urban Development, 30% is what's considered affordable. If you take the average AMI, average median income, and just use the 30% ratio, that's $1,800 a month, right? So when we look at trying to afford housing in our community, $72,000, what's considered affordable for the property value to purchase, is $250,000. Realtor.com, which is a subsidiary or affiliated with the National Association of Realtors, states that the average median income, average listing price in Saco was around $500,000. That equates to monthly mortgage payments of, I gotta go back, $3,963, and that's if you put down a down payment of $115,000. We've botched this. We haven't had an active committee over the last couple of years to try to catch up. We've tried to talk it, but the council as a whole, in September, we didn't push forward. Now I want to go back to facts. Our emergency ordinance for enacting emergency moratoriums, I'll just go with the first sentence, is to meet public emergency affecting life, health, property, or the public peace. The city council may adopt one or more emergency items. Where I've struggled is, for years we've had this defunct committee because we don't have appointments to actually do anything with it, a committee of 2, and it's with Councilor Gunn. There's not much we can do. That's not a committee, that's just a group, a couple. I tried to fit emergency. So I've looked at what is it, how do I connect emergency to this proposal, and this is where I struggle. I haven't been able to find one. Land is a limited resource. We develop on it, we never get it back. Could that be construed as an emergency? One could argue. I'm having a hard time connecting. The others ones is health, again, property. Yes, it's connected in property, but to stretch it to fit, I struggle with. And the last is public peace. Traffic is getting out of control, things like that. I want the moratorium, but I can't connect it to an emergency, and that's my biggest struggle. So I'm going to have to actually vote no on this, even though I want it, only because after some additional research, I just can't connect it. I can't define it and create a precedent to make it stretch to work. So we need to do a moratorium, yes. We need to figure something out. We need to get, and I'm not even talking about the project, that's why I was going by facts, but we need to get either the income of our residents up or the cost of your average home down. That's how we make it affordable. And I can't do that today by any means, but we need to move forward on this because it's not working, and I think we can all agree on that. And again, this is a state issue, it's a city issue, it's a national issue, I get it. But 30% of your income should go to housing. It's simple math to figure out what's affordable. Us being in the 500,000 range for the average citizen is way out of control. So I'm going to leave on that, but unfortunately I can't connect this to an emergency. So, thank you.
Thank you, Councilor Archer. Any other discussion or comments? Councilor Johnston.
Thank you. Geez, got all sorts of thoughts on this issue. I will say, I think that everybody that has spoken tonight has valid points, and that tends to be the case when you have an issue like this one. But, you know, my perspective on this, again, this is solely mine, and maybe it stems from, you know, representing a ward that is more disadvantaged than others. I mean, 8 months have passed since we last took this up. We've done nothing. Nothing. We sit here and give it lip service over and over. I've thrown out ideas, but I don't control agendas. That, as we know, sticks with the mayor. Yes, it's great that we're looking at potentially talking about an issue workshop in the future. For a decade, okay, going back to the first time I ran for city council, housing affordability was an issue I brought forward, particularly for young families. I think back to that time, the average house in Saco was probably around $325,000. I thought that was pretty high for a 30-year-old with a small child just starting out, particularly if they were individuals that had grown up here in Saco and not someone coming from away with, you know, higher incomes to begin with. I think that to sit here and be concerned about 61 days or 120 days is really kind of ridiculous when, again, we wasted 8 months. Honestly, I can go back even further when Councilor Archer and I had some preliminary discussions back in, I believe it was 2018, about the same subject and instituting a moratorium. You know, the word got out to real estate developers and realtors, and all of a sudden it was a major issue. You know, and they sent us nasty emails and everything else, ignoring the fact of what we were actually trying to bring forth. So I also find it rather offensive that there's members of the public that have insinuated that the only issue here is the Lincoln development. Again, for me, I've got no skin in that game. That certainly has nothing to do with my motivation, or at least support of this. I think that there are easy strategies, low-hanging fruit. I've said them in these council chambers under council comments before, whether it's requiring every subdivision to have a percentage of low-income housing or affordable housing as a requirement. There's an idea right there. We're concerned about reinventing the wheel, supposedly, when there's so many of these tools already out there in surrounding communities. We have just failed to act upon it. So it sounds like we're going to continue to fail to act upon something, because the way I look at this emergency is, again, going back to constituents in my wards. I know of people that are living in their cars, living on the street. Just recently, I was notified of a family that is leaving Saco because they have outgrown their two-bedroom apartment. They have 2 young boys, don't have adequate space. They cannot find anything in the city of Saco for under $2,000 for a rental, okay? So they're moving out of state. That's Maine people, Saco people going elsewhere, because we've done nothing to address this issue. I can go back to, let's see, 2017. I'll leave out the subdivision, but a popular subdivision. The average house in that subdivision was selling for $581,000. Again, in 2017, I thought that was absurd. The same house, I just looked up recently, $1.15 million. $1.15 million in Saco. If someone had told me that as a young man, I would have said, hell no, that's not going to happen, not unless it's on the ocean. And this is not on the ocean. I suggest you all go through listings and see what properties are selling for. We have a responsibility to address this issue. And I understand people don't like the idea of emergency or it's unfair, but again, it's a tool in the toolbox that's allowed by state law. So again, I can go through a condo. 5 years ago, Island Terrace, $90,000, now selling for $325,000. So how are we going to keep seniors in Saco when they used to be affordable, and that's what primarily used to live at Island Terrace? Now they're $325,000, and most of them are being rented out. We can go through, I can point you to specific properties, recent sales, 100% short-term rentals now, selling for over $800,000 from people from Massachusetts, now renting that same house out that used to have a family in it nightly. We've done nothing to address the short-term rental issue. I've stated that over and over, going back 5 years to 2017. Again, one-bedroom apartment in the city of Saco, $1,500 starting. That's the minimum. That's the floor for a one-bedroom, small one-bedroom. Look across the street. You'll see what I'm talking about. Two-bedroom, $2,000 plus range. Are we just going to sit here? I don't want to sit here anymore and just spin my wheels on this issue. So I actually was appreciative that Councilor Hatch brought this back forth, because 9 months ago, we sat here with a split vote on it, and I thought, hey, maybe we'd actually act upon it now. But instead, it seems like we're going to sit here and do the same BS over and over and act like we're going to act. So I think you know where my vote is on this. I'll tell you, the housing market will never push affordability, ever. It's just not what it does. That's capitalism for you. The only way to make these changes are at policy decisions by this council. And I hope, whether this passes or not, we'll get serious about the issue and not be back here 8 months from now talking about the need for an emergency ordinance because we didn't do anything 8, 9, 10, 3 years ago, 4 years ago, 10 years ago, 20 years ago. Thank you.
Thank you, Councilor Johnston. Councilor Hatch.
Thank you, Deputy Mayor McPhail. I'm just going to end the conversation here. My intention was to not necessarily create an emergency ordinance, but create an emergency, because I'm getting tired of sitting around doing nothing. I work hard to bring issues before the council. I did that one round 8 months ago. There was consistent negative energy coming at that. Fine, back off. There was a comment that this is not the way to do it. There are better ways to do this. And what are we, eight months later? And whatever that better way is, I don't know what it is because nobody brought it forward. So it's pretty clear to me that the tenor of the vote tonight will not be in favor of this. That's okay. I'm a big boy. I always try to find a silver lining within a dark cloud, and I think the silver lining tonight, if nothing more, I hope that at least those counselors who were bringing forth, and those from the public bringing negative energy, take that negative energy like I have done my whole life, and I've preached to my kids and anybody else who will listen. When something negative happens, take that energy and make it positive. And the positive result in this case is it's an emergency. If you don't want an emergency ordinance, then get your act together and come to that workshop next week with a very clear indication of where you stand on affordable housing. And come to that meeting with some suggestions to our staff, who is incredibly competent, with some directives as to how are we going to put effective action plans in place. Because I'm getting tired of talking about this, and I'm going to one-up you, Councilor Johnson. I was on the planning board in the mid-'80s. We talked about affordable housing. Okay? The mid-'80s. 38 years ago, we've done nothing. So I'm going to continue to challenge my fellow counselors here to get it together, and let's put policy together that's effective, because I want my 2 grandchildren who live in the city of Saco to stay here and live here. And I can tell you right now, that's going to be a real challenge. Thank you.
Thank you, Counselor Hatch. Counselor Archer, then Counselor Gunn.
Yes, thank you, Deputy Mayor. So again, I've already said where I'm going with this, and I defined the exact reason why. Moratorium, we've got to change ourselves. I just couldn't connect it to an emergency as presented, because that's just how my brain processes things, and that's how I look at things. But no matter what happens with the vote, Councilor Hatch did bring it to our attention. He got a counselor to say that the council has botched housing in Saco. I said it. I don't mind it. So no matter what happens today, Councilor Hatch did accomplish something by getting it on our radar, recognizing that we all want housing affordability. We have different ways to get there, and it's almost a call to action is what Councilor Hatch has presented. So again, even if it doesn't pass, he still has made it to the public forefront, and I'm hoping that this is the precipice for us to start really focusing on it, getting it on the agenda, and start doing action items and finding ways to get that, again, income up, get that median AMI up, or get the average cost of property down, the cost of property down. And there are ways to do that. Tax credits. You can work with developers who work with low-income housing that actually put it into their document that says they're not going to sell at market rate. Market rate is good for the traditional market, but when you're looking for low-income housing, market rate does not equivalent to affordable. So we've got to look at some ways to get low-income housing specifically in here, and this can include anything from participants that I work with that are in TANF in my professional capacity to elderly. I know as a commander of AMVETS in Biddeford, I know a lot of veterans that are struggling. And I'm considered the youngest at 40. Most of them are in their 70s, Vietnam vets. And they struggle, even in Biddeford, to afford housing. So, like I said, Councilor Hatch, while this may not go forward, he has brought it to the attention, and I hope that it gets the attention that it deserves in the form of getting on agendas. Thank you.
Thank you. Counselor Gunn.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Mayor. I just want to make a brief comment for the benefit of the public to piggyback a little bit on Councilor Archer said, because we are on this dormant housing committee, that Saco hasn't just dropped the ball. Biddeford has, South Portland has, Westbrook has, Portland. We see it on the nightly news. All they're doing is just moving people around that need a place to live. And by the grace of God go I, though, eventually some of those folks are going to come down here because they're probably going to get tired of being pushed around or living under an interstate. So I resent the idea that, we've only played lip service to this, though. We, as a council, tasked our staff to come up with solutions and come up with concrete suggestions, because that's what they're here for. We have a professional city government of people that are non-political, that are here to professionally create the best type of municipality for all of us to live in, and for all of us to basically get the best bang for our buck in terms of the place that we live. That's their job. And that's what we tasked them for. And that's what they've been doing for the last couple months at the direction of the city administrator. They have been coming up with solutions. Now, to Councilor Johnson's point, yes, there are points that just sitting here brainstorming about it, they're good points. And truth be told, when we have a workshop next week, some of those points that we've talked about amongst ourselves may be included. And you know what? That's great. We're here elected on your behalf to basically come up with the best policy decisions we can. But at the same time, we are from you. We are normal people. We are regular people. That's why we have a professional staff, though, because when we have regular people, you get differences of opinion that will impede our ability to make positive change. You have some people that are more pro-growth. You have some people up here that are more anti-growth, regardless of the smart growth, that nonsense that everyone throws around that means nothing. We've tasked our staff with coming up with solutions, and we were going to do it last week. We had a long session. So next week we're going to have a workshop, and we're going to sit down here and we're going to listen to what they have to say. If they give us concrete things, which I think, given the talent and the fortitude of our staff that you are lucky as citizens to have, we're going to be able to turn around and say, okay, we're not going to let Saco get to the point that Portland has, or any other communities for that matter. We are going to be proactive about this and do our best to make sure people have affordable housing. Now, if they give us some stuff that is not that concrete, then you know what? Then we have gone through the process and respected the process, and then we can turn around and look for, as someone mentioned, what other cities are doing, if they're being more proactive. Or we can look at moratoriums if we're not confident that the staff has given us things that we can work with, though. But we're following the process. I know it's been frustrating for us once we've enacted this task force to basically continue on with business, letting them do their job while we've had complaints up here from everyone, some people, that we're doing nothing. No, we're letting the process play out. We're not interfering with it, though. Why? And the reason I approved of it is because guess what? Your politicians in every city council up the I-95 corridor have screwed this up for 30 years. If there wasn't a problem, there is a problem now. And I fail to believe that us collectively here or any other city have had the tools to magically fix this. That's why we did the responsible thing of saying, hey, as a council, we don't know all the answers. We can sit here and we can have opinions and we can have policies we want and we can have visions. But if we don't have all the answers to something like this, guess what? You have a professional form of government, a council manager form of government. That's your professional part of the government right there. These are people that are working all week to keep this city from falling in the river, despite the fact that we haven't invested a lot in our industry, in our housing, things that would bring your property and mill rate taxes down. Despite having a community that has collectively said we are not liking growth, then the money's going to come from somewhere. That money is not only going to help you as taxpayers, but it's also going to help people that need housing, because the money's going to come from somewhere. Despite having that barricade thrown at them, they show up to work every day, and as I said, we have tasked them with coming up with solutions. And I'm looking forward to seeing what those are, because, like I said, every council, your state government, is all guilty of dropping the ball on this one because the problem exists, So, like I said, a week from now, we're going to be sitting here in a workshop, and we're going to hear what they have to say, and we will formulate policy. And I will say, if there's anyone in here whose main reason being here is because they're against a certain development and not because of affordable housing, and they're just, it happens, it's coincidental, I challenge you to show up here and actually prove to me that you actually give a damn about affordable housing, because if we get everybody in the conversation, regardless of how you feel about growth, anti-growth, this is something that we can all be in the room together with and be proactive so our community can continue to thrive and we don't fail as a community. Thank you.
Thank you. City Administrator?
Thank you. Just a word and some information about the Affordable Housing Task Force. So this was a task force that was created and established by staff, by me. We have met 3 or 4 times. So I just want to temper the expectations a little bit for next week. We're going to be coming forward with some information, with a game plan of what we've begun to do. We're going to have at least one minor proposal to begin to address workforce housing. But we have met, I think, 3 or 4 times. And this is going to be an ongoing effort, the meeting of this committee, to report out recommendations. There is no grand 100-page report coming, at least not yet. This is in its infancy. So some great work has been going on. There's some good chemistry on the committee. I think it has a lot of great prospects in the future, but I just want to temper the expectations a little bit, and that we're not coming next week with 10 points to solve with a magic wand the housing crisis, because that's not happening. I think we're definitely moving in the right direction, doing some good work, and to begin the conversation. We have a number of areas or a number of legs of the stool next week to talk about when we talk about affordable housing. So I think that's going to be a good discussion with the council. But just to, again, talk about what the Affordable Housing Task Force is, where it came from, and where we are right now, and that is 3 meetings into the formation of a committee. Thank you.
Thank you, City Administrator Kenroth. Councilor Berman?
Yeah, thank you, Madam Deputy Mayor. I'll try to be brief. I suspect if there was an ordinance proposed tonight that was to address affordable housing, the reception would have been very different. You might have gotten 7 votes in favor of it. I think where we disagree is whether this proposed moratorium was one such ordinance. The need is clear. My fellow councilors have made that point really really articulately. The public made that point really articulately. We heard a lot of evidence that housing in Saco isn't affordable. I might suggest that we don't need to look much further than across the river. Several people in the audience tonight, or who were in the audience tonight, sent me links to the Biddeford Affordable Housing Committee's final report, right, which makes some maybe innovative or maybe just pretty routine suggestions, including considering inclusionary zoning techniques or density bonuses or setting up public land trusts or using public land to create affordable housing. These are all places that I suggest we start discussing and get proposals on a table as early as next week if we're ready. And then I think the discussion becomes one not of moratoriums and buying time, but of discussing the actual merits of these various proposals, right, leading to real activity. And that's what's been missing so far, is actual proposals to address this problem that we can discuss, dig our teeth into, and then support. And a lot of the work for this region has been done right across the river. The report's on their website. I suggest that's a place we can start.
Thank you, Councilor Berman. Anyone else? Okay, not seeing any additional discussion. Roll call vote. Councilor Archer.
No.
Councilor Purdy.
No.
Councilor Gunn.
No.
Councilor Berman.
No.
Councilor Hatch.
Yes.
Councilor Johnston.
Yes.
Motion fails 4-2. Okay, that completes our action items for tonight. Item number 10, we have new business. First up on the new business is an audit presentation. I believe Director Salas. And RKO. Yep.
This didn't work last year, so.
We've had some updates. So it's installing.
The folder? Hey, it worked this year.
Got it. Just in time. I was going to give a 2-minute break. Go ahead.
All right. My name is Timothy Gill. I'm from RKO, running Kirsten Willett, and I'm here to present the 2022 audit results. A little delayed. We've had some trouble getting some information this year, some staffing shortages that kind of put us behind, but nevertheless, here to present the results. 14 slides to go through tonight. I'm going to try and go over the highlights pretty briefly. If at any point I'm going too fast, please feel free to stop me. Before I get into it, I want to say thank you very much to the city staff, the school staff, for putting together all the information. You know, the results and some of the things we're going to talk about tonight are the result of all the work and all the information that was gathered throughout the year, and there's a lot to go through, so it's a big undertaking to pull this stuff together for the audit process, so I appreciate that. Tonight I'm going to start off with a summary of the audit results, go over very briefly some of the highlights, not really touch upon too much of the budget actual stuff because I feel like you get that every month. but then I'm going to really discuss about where you ended up at the end of the year and how that compares to prior years and to other towns and cities in the state. So on this slide, you'll see the summary of the audit results. The first bullet point being the financial statement opinion. It's unmodified. You're probably asking, what does that mean? Well, our whole purpose as auditors is to give an opinion on the financial statements as to whether or not they are fairly presented in all material respects in accordance with all accounting standards and principles. So the opinion that we did give is unmodified, which is exactly what you want. It means we did believe that your financial statements present everything fairly in all material respects in accordance with accounting principles. And I keep using that phrase, all material respects. It's basically our way of saying there's a margin of error built into what we do. We do not test 100% of all transactions. We use a risk-based approach to figure out sample areas of the highest risk areas, and that's where we direct our samples, and that's how we test. We do internal control testing, where we look at procedures over payroll, over cash disbursements and purchasing, procedures over cash receipts and billing, all to kind of gather information and to direct our testing. One of the byproducts of that information and risk assessment gathering is that we're able to offer you some recommendations, and under the government auditing standards, we're required to kind of put those recommendations into 3 categories. One category being material weaknesses. These are really severe issues that you want to take notice of and that should be corrected as soon as possible. There were none of those to report in 2022. The next level down is considered a significant deficiency. Again, not quite as severe as material weakness, but something you really should take notice of and kind of implement action on. None of those to report for fiscal 2022. And then the last level, the most least severe level, is basically just kind of other recommendations and comments that we think will help you improve operating efficiency. So one of the comments this year relates to the school activity fund, specifically the middle school. Again, as part of our risk assessment process, we tested internal controls there. We looked at the ins and outs, how they were purchasing things, how they were receiving funds in, and we found that on the receipt side of things, that they were collecting money and not depositing it in a timely manner. In fact, I think it was 5 out of 18 receipts that we tested were not deemed timely, and timely was defined as within 10 business days. So really, we'd like to see funds being collected and deposited timely because it secures the assets, it safeguards them. Anytime you have cash or checks kind of kicking around somebody's desk drawer or even in a locked safe, it can get shuffled around and lost. So the sooner it gets to the bank, the better. And on the purchasing side of things, we found 10 out of our 40 disbursements tested were actually approved for payment after the payment was already made. So that's kind of an inherent flaw in the process. The approval really should be before the payment is made. That's something that we recommended to management there to kind of, tighten up the procedures there and tighten up the controls. The other comment that we have to report on for 2022 is the school payroll processing. Due to some of the staffing shortages at the school, we found that a lot of the documentation that we requested couldn't really be provided. There was turnover, documentation was lost, couldn't be located. We found that certain employer contributions for health insurance weren't being calculated correctly through the system. They weren't being entered into the system and programmed the proper way. All the related insurance and bills were being paid properly, but it was just a matter of how they were being allocated and tracked, and the system wasn't proper. Again, really all attributable to the turnover in personnel. But that's something we had to report to you. And if you look at the hard copies of the reports, management was required to provide a response to that, and they have implemented a process to kind of streamline the documentation and streamline the HR side of things, how they document the deductions and the wage rate approvals as well. Another part of the audit process is the uniform guidance testing that we do, and this is the testing over the grants, specifically the federal grants that you receive during the year. In 2022, the town and the school combined spent about $4.8 million in federal grants that they received. So we're required to test several of those grants. Again, it's a risk-based process. We don't test all the grants. We just test a sample of the grants. In 2022, we tested the special education cluster, which is also known as local entitlement. There's the school age and the preschool grant. That accounted for about $832,000 during fiscal year 22. We go in, we test the disbursement process. We look at making sure that the purchases under that program are allowable, that they're reasonable, making sure that they're reporting things in their program metrics appropriately to the state and the federal agencies. There were no findings as part of that testing during 2022. And then also we tested the elementary and secondary school emergency relief, also known as ESSER. That program at the school had 3 different grants underneath that, combining for a total about $1.5 million in 2022. Again, we looked at things, making sure that they were spending it on allowable costs, making sure they were doing the reporting appropriately to the state and following all the grant regulations. We found no issues of non-compliance with the regulations for 2022. Any questions on those audit results before I move on to some of the financial highlights? All right, fair enough. So in 2022, and again, the highlights that I'm going to talk about mostly tonight focuses on the city general fund and the school operations fund. You have lots of little different funds or buckets where funds are coming from and where they're being accounted for. Within the city, the 2 largest funds are the general fund and the school operations fund, so that's where I'm going to focus on tonight. So the city general fund had a net increase in fund balance of $365,000 during the year. And this is because revenues had exceeded budget by approximately $2 million due to additional state revenue sharing and increased excise tax collections. And then on the other side of things, the expenditures were also under budget, realizing savings of about $700,000. So those 2 things combined resulted in a net fund balance increase of $365,000. There's some transfers and other things that are kind of left out of that, so that's why it doesn't really add up totally. But if you look at Statement 6, which is also Exhibit A2 in the financial statements, you'll see a lot more detail of what was over or under budget and what the transfers were to get to that ending number. On the school side of things, they really had a large increase in fund balance during the year, almost $2 million. Again, primarily due to increased state subsidy during the year. That was unexpected, so that really helped. They also achieved some savings in the expenditure side, some of it just kind of by default because positions weren't able to be filled during the year. Anytime I talk about budget to actual variances to a council, 9 times out of 10, it's because of staffing and the way that budgeted positions are either filled or there's additional positions needed throughout the year. So that accounts for a lot of the budget to actual variances that I speak of. So what does that all mean? Well, on this next slide, you'll see the general fund, the fund balance, basically your assets minus your liabilities, what do you have left over to kind of spend and to utilize going forward. You'll see over the last 5 years, it's not really too apparent from this slide, but it has been trending upward ever so slightly. And I have another slide and a couple more that you'll see that trend a little better. But fund balance is required to be split out into different categories. There's restricted, committed, non-spendable, assigned, and unassigned. The largest category being the unassigned, meaning it's kind of free and available for use to be kind of used as you see fit. Assigned is meaning those are usually budget items that happened in fiscal year 2022, but due to timing constraints, they weren't able to be achieved in 2022, so they're being carried over to next year, so that funding source isn't lost. And that makes up that $355,000 there. And then non-spendable sources, those are, as the name suggests, not spendable. They've already been spent because it's usually prepaid assets or prepaid expenses that make up that, so it's already been spent. It's not a liquid asset. You can't spend it again. This slide shows basically the same comparison only for the school operations fund. The school operations fund has been in a deficit for the last several years, but again, due to the additional state subsidy received this year and some budgeted savings, they flipped that around this year, and now they have a budget fund balance. So now they have approximately 1.2 million available for use to offset some future expenditures. The state does restrict the amount of fund balance that a school operations fund can carry forward from year to year. Typically, it's 5% of your budget. So that's something that the school is going to have to kind of manage going forward. As they see these fund balances grow, they might have to designate some of it for capital purposes or assign it for specific use, or utilize it to offset future budgets. So one of the metrics that a lot of places like to look at is the unassigned fund balance as a percent of budget. Kind of gives you a sense of how well equipped you are to handle a significant event. If something happens, how well could you absorb that and keep moving forward. The GFOA, with the Government Finance Officers Association, and RKO recommend that you have approximately 2 months' worth of fund balance, or 2 months' worth of your budget in fund balance available to use in the event of emergency. So that equates to about 16%. You can see historically the city general fund has been right around 16%, usually a little bit above over the last 5 years. So sitting pretty good based on that recommendation. And then the city and school combined, a little bit lower because of the deficit in the school operations fund, but still sitting pretty comfortably right around that 16% mark. And compared to other communities, you'll see Augusta, Biddeford, Gorham, and Saco listed there. Saco's kind of right in the middle of it for the last 2 years. So relatively hitting the metrics on all marks. On this slide, you'll see the general fund unassigned and assigned fund balance. Going a little deeper now, instead of just presenting it for 5 years, it's showing you 10 years. So that trend that I was talking about earlier about how the fund balance has kind of grown over the last few years is really kind of seen better here and exaggerated a little bit. So there's been some pretty good growth, keeping that fund balance at an appropriate level to weather the storm, as it may be. This next slide shows you the 10-year comparison and property tax collection rates. Historically, the city has a really good collection rate, usually right around 97% of all taxes assessed are collected within the year of assessment. And then within a couple of years, you're pretty much up to 100%. So tax collection rates are pretty high. The current year collections are all in the green there, and then collected in subsequent fiscal years in the blue. So you can see after a couple of years, you're pretty much following up and collecting all the taxes that have been assessed. Local property tax rates, hovering right around $18 to $19 per $1,000 in assessment. Pretty stable over the last couple of years, the last 10 years rather. And you can kind of directly link this back to the fund balance, where you've had that available fund balance, that unassigned fund balance available for spending. So you're able to kind of utilize some of that to offset some budget increases that are coming along the line in future years to help keep that tax rate a little bit more stable as opposed to going up and down from year to year. So pretty consistent over the last 10 years. This slide shows you the expenditure distribution for 2022. The biggest slice you'll see there is shown as transfer out. This is just the city general fund, and so they collect and assess the taxes on behalf of the school, and then they transfer out those taxes collected to the school operations fund. So a good chunk of that transfer out is basically the transfer of taxes collected on behalf of the school operations fund. So that's always going to be your largest category. And if you were to lay this chart over the chart that I showed you last year, it's essentially no change. The ratios and the percentages are pretty consistent from year to year. So on this slide, I'm showing you some of the long-term liabilities, just so you can get a sense of your debt that you have incurred to finance projects over the years. So for the governmental activities, which is pretty much everything except for the wastewater fund, you'll see that the bonds payable has declined pretty steadily over the last 5 years. As you make your regular principal payments on debt, there haven't been any significant debt issuances over the last couple of years, so that number's been slowly declining. Notes payable, a much smaller portion. That's also basically the same thing. That's just a different form of debt. Finance purchases payable are also a type of debt. It's usually more short-term debt, usually 3 to 5 years, whereas the bonds payable are usually over 20 to 30 years. So the finance purchases payable tend to be utilized here a little bit more frequently. But even so, that's been pretty consistent over the last couple of years, hovering right around that $4 million mark. And then the last two items on that slide are the net pension liability and the OPEB liability, which I will point out are kind of calculated and figured out by actuaries. They make a lot of assumptions to figure out, okay, what is the retirement portion of the Maine State Retirement System that's attributable to the town of Saco or the city of Saco. And so you'll see in the past couple of years, it's really been anywhere from $3 to $6 million. And in 2022, you got a negative number there. Well, they actually had a calculation that said they were overfunded in 2022, so they had a pension asset. And so that trickled down to your share of roughly $300,000. I wouldn't get too comfortable with that because I've already seen the numbers for next year, and it's flipped right back the other way. But it's not a liability that you're going to have to pay out next year. It's something that you're funding annually, or in fact monthly, from period to period. So this is kind of like a theoretical liability. Same thing with the other pension, other post-employment benefits. The OPEB liabilities, that's your health insurance and what you're theoretically going to contribute over time. So again, that's a number made up of lots of assumptions by the actuaries. That one's been a little bit more consistent over the years, right around the $6 million mark. So we were just looking at all your liabilities and your debt. But what is your debt burden per capita? What's your debt there relevant to each citizen? And typically, bond rating agencies like to see this number at 2,000 or less. You're well within that mark, and you can see in 2018, it took a little jump up. You issued some debt that year, that's why it jumped up. And then in 2019 and 2020 and so on, it started to decline as you paid off your debt, and there were no new major debt issuances. So it's going to continue to decline until you issue new debt. And then the last slide I have to show you is your debt per capita compared to other cities. Saco, very, very low compared to other cities like Biddeford and Gorham. They have a much higher debt burden. But again, this kind of all can be linked back to your fund balance. You have a very healthy fund balance, which allows you to finance certain things internally rather than seeking external financing. Allows you to weather the storm when unexpected things come out from year to year. So very healthy fund balance that allows you to keep those numbers at a minimum. Questions?
Thank you so much. Do we have any questions from council for RKO? No, we're not seeing any.
All right.
We appreciate that.
Thank you very much for your time.
Thank you. Okay, up next under new business, we have a status update on the draft commercial solar energy system ordinance. We got Emily for? Yeah. And that is going to be Director Prescott. City Planner Prescott.
Hello, I don't have red lines to share with you tonight, but our plan is to bring red lines to the meeting on the 26th. I've told that the workshop is only a housing workshop, so I will not be bringing anything other than housing to the June 12th workshop. In the meantime, though, these are going to be going to the Energy and Sustainability Committee for discussion. And then our update is going to go further legal review. We've already been working with the electrical inspector, and it's going to go through staff committee. So I just want to give a status update as to why we were requesting a moratorium extension. Additionally, council is going to go into a summer schedule, so the dates just didn't line up exactly right to keep the 61 days in play. So I appreciate the support on that. and we're working hard to get this done. As our affordable housing ordinance updates are also out already. They've already been going to long-range planning committee, and we had them ready for the May 22nd workshop. So I look forward to talking about that as well. Thank you.
Great, thank you. Counselor Gunn, you are still assigned to that? Okay. Okay, so we will see that coming up. Okay, and next we have review of supported entities, the financials, and that is Director Salas.
Hi, yes, thank you. So this was the first year that the Finance Department implemented the revisions to the grants policy that were approved by Council. I think it was January or February. And those revisions required that any supported entities receiving discretionary funding from the City of Saco through the annual budget appropriation process would have some kind of financial review by the Finance Department. So what the process looked like for this first year was we sent an email out to those supported entities requesting their financials in April, and did a follow-up in May, and let them know that we were going to be presenting the results of that review to council to sort of aid in timely response on that. Looking forward to next year, I anticipate that we will be requesting budget numbers to be associated with the budget request to council. So if we have questions about the budgets that we're seeing, we can ask those before council approves the discretionary appropriation in the budget process. Additionally, I'm hoping to be able to have this review of the financials prepared for council prior to budget approval. So if council wants to amend or otherwise reduce funding for any supported entity because of compliance considerations, you have an opportunity to do so before the budget's approved. So those are some changes I am anticipating for next year's process. Not a whole lot to say about the financials other than most of our supported entities were very compliant. Not a lot of concerns in the financial statements that I did review. Saco River Corridor Commission, I have an open dialogue currently with the executive director there about getting a balance sheet report. That was just the one piece that we're missing. I also offered for nonprofit organizations that might not have or be comfortable preparing a balance sheet that they can simply provide the IRS 990 form, which nonprofits are required to file annually. So I'm in conversation with Saco River Corridor about closing the loop on that. The other one was Thornton Academy. So obviously the City of Saco expends significant funds with Thornton Academy on the student tuition side. My compliance check was related to the discretionary spending that the council approves to Thornton Academy to run TATV. But I did ask for their financials, as I did all other supported entities. They did not share their budget or financial statements with me. I do know that they are audited by an external accounting firm, but they did not provide those financials. Instead, I was directed to the IRS website where I was able to pull down their 2021 990 and review it. But the IRS is a little behind. For anyone who works for the IRS, that's not news. And so the 2022 IRS 990 form for Thornton Academy is not available yet on their website. So Thornton Academy was the only organization that was out of compliance for this year's review. Any questions?
Any questions for Director Salas? Councilor Berman, then Councilor Gunn.
Yeah, I actually have two questions. In the commentary above your findings, you list both Thornton Academy and BSOOB Transit as declining to share their financial statements, but then in the chart itself, BSOOB Transit has X's as if they did share it. Did that status change at some point, or?
Yes, my apologies. BSOOB Transit did get their financials to me Wednesday afternoon on the 31st at about 3:30. So I marked them in compliance, but I forgot that I had listed them in the narrative. So that's the difference. But they did get them into me.
No problem. And then looking at TA being out of compliance just brought a different question into my mind. As a nonprofit in the city, do they participate in our pilot program?
They do not, because student housing is expressly excluded from the state of Maine payment in lieu of taxes ordinance. So the only approach that we could take with Thornton Academy for a payment in lieu of taxes agreement would be sort of a voluntary agreement, similar to what UNE has with Bedford. But of course, the city of Saco does spend, I think it's $20 to $25 million in tuition to Thornton Academy. So I don't know that, or it might be less than that. I don't know the numbers off the top of my head, but I do know we do expend significant tuition. So there's a significant financial relationship that exists with Thornton Academy that a payment in lieu of taxes agreement might complicate. But certainly, when it comes to the housing and what we're allowed to mandate under state statute, student housing is excluded, so we can't mandate payments from Thornton.
Thank you.
Thank you. Councilor Gunn, then Councilor Hatch.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Mayor. Glennis, pardon me if you've already mentioned this, though, but did Thornton give us a specific reason why they wouldn't share the financials?
I did not get a specific reason, no.
Okay, thank you.
Councilor Hatch?
Thank you, Deputy Mayor McPhail. Back to TATV. Is there any way we could at least entice them to document for us the expenditures related to that contribution that we made? Not necessarily the whole shooting match of financial information. You pull a 990, you're probably not going to drill down deep enough to find out anything about TATV. So just a simple request, if we gave you $5,000, can you just tell us how it was spent so we can at least feel like we're doing our due diligence for the citizens of Saco? Is that a possibility?
Certainly, I could reach out to, I believe the person who is running the program has changed over, but I could see if they'd be willing to sort of just provide us a small isolated snapshot of how the funds were expended.
Thank you. Any other questions for Director Salas regarding the budget, the supported entities? Okay, not seeing any. Next up, we have the April budget update.
Great, thank you. So I'm with you for one more item. So the city of Saco ended April in a strong position. Net operating income was $5,043,575, and the unassigned fund balance was at $17,170,778. The city's all-in cash position, including investments, was $43,692,794 as of April 30th, 2023. On the expenditure side, the city of Saco is 1% behind forecast, or $393,134 below forecast. For the Q4 FY 2023 update, so that'll be April, May, and June, I'll be focusing on those departments that are tracking ahead of forecast, as of course our top priority is to make sure that we are coming in at or below budget, the budget that was appropriated by council through the close of the year. So when taking that lens to approach our reporting, city assessing, capital projects, city administration, city clerk, code enforcement, communications, contingency, council, county tax, fringe benefits, information technology, planning, police, solicitor, and supported entities are all tracking below forecast. So not any concerns at this point in time through April regarding maintaining at or below council appropriation. Tracking through the other departments, economic development, there's $997 that was expended in the general fund but not budgeted. These items have already been reclassed to the downtown development TIF district, which is where all economic development operations are budgeted. Finance is tracking 2% ahead of forecast. Software fees have come in higher than anticipated. The department has negotiated with Paychex for a credit of $2,250 on a particular package that should have been canceled earlier in the year. And we are actively reviewing payroll fees to see if there are other potential credits owed to the city. Finance department is 3% ahead of forecast. Overtime net of base pay is over budget by $101,735. This is due to some staffing challenges in the department. Human Resources is 6% ahead of forecast. The department has had some wage adjustments and continues to make use of consulting services when employee investigations are needed. I am working with the department to reclass certain expenditures, hopefully to avoid going over budget. Insurance is 2% over budget. Actual premiums came in a little higher than anticipated. Parks and Recreation is 2% ahead of forecast. Certain equipment and supply purchases have been much higher than anticipated due to strong participation rates, which of course we like to see with our rec department. There's heavy use of contracted services due to turnover in the department, I believe related to tree services. The department is tracking 21% ahead of forecast on the revenue side, so all in, there is a net favorable outcome to the general fund of $127,538. So even though they're a little bit over on the expense side, we're making up for that on the fees side. Public Works is 3% ahead of forecast. This is being driven by paving activity, curbside collections, and some final payments on the LED conversion that occurred in this fiscal year. We also paid higher than anticipated on road salt. So we are feeling in fiscal year 2023 the impacts of inflation, which we have accounted for in the 24 budget. I am working with Public Works to see if there are any offsetting savings opportunities. All-in motor vehicle excise and other Public Works revenues are tracking 10% ahead of forecast, and so we are net favorable to the general fund of $247,639. So again, some surplus revenues to offset those departmental expenses. TIF transfers are 7% over budget. Again, TIFs are an estimate that are created when the budget is approved by council. However, actual TIF transfers are set by the assessing department based on tax rate and property valuation. Are there any questions about expenses?
Any questions for Director Salas? Okay, not seeing any.
Revenues. So revenues are 2% or $1.36 million ahead of forecast. Capital projects revenues, communications, which is your franchise fees, fire and ambulance fees, planning fees, and property taxes are all considered on target because they are within 5% of forecast. I should pause here and note that although fire and ambulance fees, which are transferred from the ambulance fund, are on target because we set the transfer amount at the start of the year, actual receipts in the ambulance fund are at historic highs, and in April we did exceed the $1 million mark in that fund for receipts. So showing some really strong performance, but those are being retained in the ambulance fund for this current year. Building revenues are 45% behind forecast. Building rentals have been weak in 24 because of several write-offs. City clerk revenues are 24% behind forecast. This ties to general assistance revenues, which are tracking behind forecast along with underutilization of expenses. So those two pretty much offset each other. Code enforcement revenues are 11% ahead of forecast. So construction projects have rebounded. We were seeing some slow activity, not sure where code enforcement fees were going to come in for the year, but we have had some projects, project volume and project size rebound with the warmer weather, and so that is now tracking ahead of forecast. Finance revenues are 19% behind forecast. This has to do with tax lien interest. It's behind forecast because the interest penalties were only 4% in fiscal year 2023. Interest penalties are back up to about 8% from my memory. Budget approval process, and so we should see those also be strong next year. Insurance claims. So this is the revenue line that was created to account for payment from our insurance carrier. The deposit of the first payment from the insurance carrier occurred in May. The second payment is likely to be booked as a receivable at year's end, as final payment is unlikely to incur until fiscal year 2024 upon project completion. Interest earnings are $469,480 over budget. So in total, strong performance on interest earnings year to date. Interest rates have recovered. The city has locked in interest earnings with our investors at Morgan Stanley through June 30th, 2024 for budget planning purposes. Parks and Rec fees as I mentioned earlier, 21% ahead of forecast. Participation in spring activities has been really strong. Surplus revenues offset a bit by additional equipment expenses for those programs. Police department fees are 21% ahead of forecast. The city has received 2 checks for MCJA certified police officers who took positions with other municipalities. These additional revenues are being appropriated with budget amendment number 5, which will post in May. Public works revenues are 10% ahead of forecast. Higher car prices are really just driving up revenues on fixed rates. State assistance 13% ahead of forecast. State revenue sharing and homestead exemptions higher than budgeted. This is state fully allocated its obligations on those items. Unallocated is $11,170 above budget. The city of Saco received $18,570 in opioid settlement money. Again, those funds were appropriated with budget amendment number 6, and that will post in the May budget update. Quick update on grants. The City of Saco General Fund has recorded $17,313 in grant qualified expenses and received $19,263 in grant funding. The City of Saco has recorded $142,565 in grant qualified expenses and received $106,706 in grant funding and all other funds. And the city has spent $346,185 of ARPA funds as of April 30th, 2023. Sometimes there may be a bit of a difference between the grant expenses that are booked versus revenue, depending on the timing of receipts from the grant program. Are there any questions on revenues?
Counselor Hatch.
Thank you, Deputy Mayor McPhail. I'm just going to try to connect a couple dots here. So your opening paragraph listed a cash position of $43 million and some change as of 4/30. Is that a fairly consistent amount at that time? And if we went year over year, is it about the same?
I would say it's a little bit higher. When I started, the peak I would see after tax receipts was in the low 30s. And so we've had significant growth on what our peak cash position is, partly due to ARPA funds, partly due to growth in the balances on our TIF districts, partly due to the schools' financial recovery from their deficit position, and achieving our target of 16.67% unassigned fund balance. So all of those together have stacked to, I would say, a $10 million growth on our peak cash position.
Excellent. And so I'm looking, now I'm in the revenue section, and I'm looking at the interest earnings being almost a $500,000 over budget. And if we've, just the logic in my head is if we've got a little bit more cash than we had at the same point last year, this number could, and given the way rates are moving, could become very favorable to the city.
Yes, so we have a we have a strong target for interest earnings next year, about $864,000. So I do think that is possible to achieve because of our strong balances, because there isn't, from anything I've heard, any intention of the Federal Reserve to reverse course. Certainly not to reverse course, maybe to hold flat at current earning rates. And so I think that although the $864,000 would be the highest interest earnings the city has recorded, it's a likely thing to occur. So we can feel comfortable moving into next fiscal year that we'll be receiving those earnings.
Excellent. So good job with that. Just some curiosity questions, 2 more items. How material, if we were at 100% occupancy on our building rentals, how material is that amount of money? I know you're indicating we're 45% below forecast, but just off the top of your head, I don't need are we talking about how much, $100,000, 200?
Well, we had budgeted $47,176. A lot of that has to do with a cell phone tower lease that I think it may be up to $3,000 a month for the city of Saco. At one point in time, the train station we were renting to an accounting firm, which got us about $2,500 a month. BSU Transit is currently paying us $500 a month. So there would be an opportunity to earn more in rental income if there was a higher rental income coming from that.
I think there's a lease being negotiated that will push that BSU Transit number up slightly, but so in totality, it's not compared to the $70 million budget. It's not a very material number. So that's all I kind of wanted to get straight in my head. And then last comment, the police department revenues ahead of forecast. So on the expense side, I'm just concerned about the staffing, and I'm assuming whatever positive impact we see in the budget has to do with staffing issues. And the only reason I want to bring this forward publicly is that and I've tried to do this before, we have to, as we think about growth in our city, we need to be concerned about public safety in terms of department staff. And if we're struggling to fulfill our needs for the current population, there will be a point in time where that's going to get exacerbated if we can't figure out some creative ways to resolve this challenge. And I know it's being worked on very diligently. So I just think it's a point of reference that we all should think about as we move forward. So thank you.
Any other questions or comments? Okay, not seeing any.
Thank you.
Thank you. Okay, that completes the new business section. We are on to section A, number 11,
It's my
administrative
report,
update. Sorry.
I'm going to go now, if that's all right. Okay.
Go ahead.
A couple quick updates for you. First, on the dredge, we expect the dredge to be delivered sometime later this month in June. We're currently finalizing an MOU with York County for storage of the dredge while it is still under the county's ownership but stored on city property. We'll have that for you to look at. And you should have received draft bylaws for the authority that have been developed as we go forward with establishing that organization. The transportation center lease, as you just heard, we're going to have that for you to look at probably in the next week or two. They currently pay $300 a month. It's going to be quite a bit more than that in the new lease, but we'll have the particulars to go over with you on that shortly. My next open office hours for city administrators, open office hours is on June 20th from 3:30 to 5 here on the second floor of City Hall. And of course, all residents, local business owners are welcome and encouraged to attend. A reminder, the Art Festival is on June 24th, sponsored by Saco Main Street. Please attend if you can. And lastly, as has been mentioned several times tonight, there is a housing workshop next Monday at our workshop meeting for some good discussion there on a very important topic. Thank you.
Thank you. Item number 12, council discussion and comment. Any council discussion or comment this evening? Councilor Hatch.
Thank you, Deputy Mayor McPhail. I would just like to ask City Administrator Kainrath to, I'm assuming that the June 12th will be a workshop only, and we won't intermingle a bunch of city business because we
Only on housing, a workshop on housing, and that's it.
Thank you very much, because that's what the workshops
That's all
were
we're talking
designed for. All right, I figured that was the answer. Thank you.
Any additional comments or discussion? I would like to just throw out a congratulations to the 2023 class of Thornton Academy, who is graduating this evening. Unfortunately, the graduation was postponed from yesterday to tonight due to the rain and the weather, but congratulations to all graduates and their families. Okay, next up, executive session. Is there a motion to enter executive session? Councilor Hatch.
Be it ordered that the City Council enter into executive session pursuant to MRSA Title I, Chapter 13, Subchapter 1, Section 4056, A, personnel matter, C, acquisition of property.
Motion's been made. Is there a second?
Second.
Second by Councilor Berman. Roll call vote. Councilor Archer?
Aye.
Councilor Purdy?
Yes.
Councilor Gunn?
Yes.
Councilor Berman?
Yes.
Councilor Hatch?
Yes.
Councilor Johnston?
Yes.
Motion passes 6-0 to enter into executive session. We'll take a quick 5-minute break, and we will meet in City Administrator's office. Okay, welcome back from executive session at 9:35. Is there a motion to come out of executive session?
So moved.
Motion made by Counselor Hatch. Is there a second?
Second.
Second by Counselor Berman. Roll call vote. Counselor Archer?
Aye.
Counselor Purdy?
Yes.
Counselor Gunn?
Yes.
Counselor Berman?
Yes.
Counselor Hatch?
Yes.
Counselor Johnson?
Yes.
Motion passes 6-0. Okay, there is no report on item C, acquisition of property, but we do have a report for action A, personnel matters. Counselor Berman?
Yeah, Madam Deputy Mayor, I move we appoint Chief John Duras as the interim city administrator effective Saturday, July 8th, 2023, effective until a new candidate is hired for the permanent city administrator position.
Thank you. Is there a second?
Second?
Second by Counselor Hatch. Roll call vote. Counselor Archer?
Aye.
Counselor Purdy?
Yes.
Counselor Gunn?
Yes.
Counselor Berman?
Yes.
Counselor Hatch?
Yes.
Counselor Johnston?
Yes.
Motion passes 6-0 to appoint Chief Duras as the interim city manager, city administrator. Okay, that takes us to the adjournment. Is there a motion to adjourn?
So moved?
Motion by Counselor Hatch. Is there a second?
Second.
Counselor Berman? Any discussion? Roll call vote. Counselor Archer?
Aye.
Counselor Purdy?
Yes.
Counselor Gunn?
Yes.
Counselor Berman?
Yes.
Counselor Hatch?
Yes.
Counselor Johnson?
Yes.
Motion to adjourn passes 6-0 at 9:36. Have a great evening, everyone. Thank you.